introducing Eddie Diego and Matthew Wilder, who are presenting Understanding ARIN Policy, What It Means for You. Eddie assists the ARIN Advisory Council and community in shepherding ideas for Internet Number Resource Policy through ARIN's policy development process. Matthew is a senior engineer at TELUS. And at this point, I'm going to stop with your introduction. Eddie mentioned in the bar last night, he said something that I particularly enjoyed that began with the phrase, yes, Eddie was in the bar, I know. He went to bed at a reasonable hour. He said, policies come and go. And there was a second half to his sentence that was, equally profound, but I'm editing it for this purpose to say, policies come and go, but anyone who's subscribed to the PPML can tell you policy change discussions go on forever.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Adair. I don't remember saying that, but thank you. So it is true, John. So hi, I'm Eddie Diego with ARIN. Thank you, Adair. And on stage with me, I also have members of the Advisory Council, Matthew Wilder, Jerry George, Chris Woodfield, and Caitlin Pellick. And for those who don't know, the Advisory Council is a 15-member organization, 15-member group of volunteers that are elected by the community to help with ARIN policy development. And we are here today, I should grab the clicker, to talk about ARIN policy development and hopefully answer these questions. Why is ARIN at NANOG? Why is there a PDP? How do policies impact network operators? And why is there a need for community input? And over the last couple of days, as I've been talking to folks here at NANOG, I realized there probably should have been another bullet at the very top, is who is ARIN? Very simply put, we're an organization, that's a nonprofit organization that's responsible for the management and registration of Internet number resources in basically North America. So who is a group of people in North America that needs IP4 addresses, IPv6 addresses, and ASNs? You guessed it, network operators. So we've been working closely with NANOG for a very long time. We have a memorandum of understanding where we work together on outreach, education, and the development of Internet number resource policy. As you see from this picture, you've probably seen our customer service desk at every NANOG. So ARIN's always here to support you guys, answer any questions you guys might have about registering Internet number resources, demystify any issues or concerns people might have, simplify things for you, whether it's a simple, basic ARIN 101 question or very specific to a ticket you might have in progress. We're always here to help. As you know, NANOG has 3 meetings every year. ARIN has 2 meetings every year. We hold our fall meeting in October back-to-back, continuing working together in our collaboration. At the close of NANOG's meeting today, ARIN has a welcome reception, and then our meeting continues through the week ending on Friday. There is no registration fee, and people can participate remotely. So if anyone wants to participate, we're happy to have you. At these meetings, one of the primary things we talk about is policy development. All these policies that govern and guide how Internet resources are registered to the community come through a policy development process that's community-driven. It's laid out step by step, transparent, so everybody knows what's coming up, what the next steps are. Off to the right here is a very simplified table showing our flow of how a proposal might work through the system, through the policy development process until it's implemented as actual policy. It starts as a proposal. If a community member sees a problem and they have a solution they'd like to propose, they submit it as a policy proposal. A member of the Advisory Council, 2 shepherds, will take that proposal and shepherd it through the policy development process. If it's within scope of the PDP, it becomes a draft policy. And that's where lots of the discussion takes place, primarily through our public policy mailing list and at ARIN meetings, such as the one we have tomorrow. There's a point where staff and legal will be asked, or the community will ask for a staff and legal review, where staff provides input on the policy as written. We'd explain how we would implement it, how does it impact current registration, how long it would take us to implement it, and so on, so that the community and the Advisory Council can take that feedback in their discussions on whether they think this policy should continue on to recommend a draft policy, where they now feel that the language is in a good place to be recommended to the board for adoption, and if adopted, it would be implemented and become policy. There are many benefits to having a policy process. I'm already getting over, so I'm just going to focus on the first bullet. Having a PDP is community-driven. Policies are shaped by those who use them, which is you guys. So I would like to invite Matthew Wilder to either come up here or use his microphone to talk about why policies matter to network operators. Matthew Wilder is the vice chair of the ARIN Advisory Council.
Thank you, Eddie. I'll stay seated and comfortable here. As Eddie mentioned, I'm the vice chair of the Advisory Council. If you do shake my hand, you'll see that my name tag doesn't have the ARIN affiliation listed. It's actually TELUS, which is my employer, which is an ISP in Canada. So I am a network operator. I'm one of you, and hopefully I can share my perspective on why I attend policy meetings, why I subscribe to the policy mailing list, and why policy should have some portion of your attention as well. So policies are, policies are developed from within the community and for the community. There's very good reasons for that, but really the requirements of the community should be reflected in the policy manual and the policies that we adopt. And so we need to have input from each of you as network operators so we know what those requirements are. We have a number of qualifications that a draft policy must make before we pass it on to recommended draft policy. And one of those is that the policy is technically sound. And so having a variety of different network operators with different types of networks, different technologies employed, that's crucial for us so that we don't miss anything. So please do especially chime in on those sort of things. These are the policies that affect the allocation of number resources and transfers and more. So paying attention is recommended. And so really, again, your input will ensure that the policies we adopt reflect the requirements of the community. Thanks, Eddie. So we're going to talk about two types of policies. Draft policies and then recommended draft policies. So there's a graduation that occurs. There's also an off-ramp if we do decide to abandon a policy. But assuming a policy progresses and has community support, we may move from draft to recommended draft policy. So draft, let's talk about draft policies. These are in an earlier stage of development. So we'll get a proposal from anyone in the community, and that could be anyone around the world. Can submit a proposal. If we adopt it on as a draft policy after confirming it meets certain conditions, it's then up for the community to discuss first through the mailing list, but also potentially at a public policy meeting. So it's very early stage. There's a lot of active discussion. There's a lot of possible changes that could take place in the policy. It's very malleable at that point. When it reaches a time where the advisory council believes we see a demonstration of the principles we need to see for recommended draft policy, we will look at advancing it to that stage, as mentioned. So we need technically sound, fair and impartial, and community supported. And I know I'm going to be called out if I don't get all the details in there because one of the authors of the PDP is sitting in the room, so I've got to make sure Hey, Amy. All right. In the recommended draft policy status, we see that we have some degree of consensus already, right? We had that community support that got it to recommended draft policy. The Advisory Council has formally moved it to this status. That's a motion that occurs in one of our meetings, and it has to get majority vote. And then we have another component that is already present there is the staff and legal review. So Eddie talked about that. The staff and legal review really helps, in my perspective, it helps the board and everyone involved in the process to identify any issues before the board is looking to adopt. Imagine if we didn't have this feedback and the board's looking at how is this going to affect the organization? well, we don't have to guess. That's already been anticipated and studied by the by staff and by legal. So that's a key component of the process, so that we have a smooth adoption of policies that are accepted. All right. So your role, I would say some calls to action. Join the ARIN Public Policy mailing list. Just keep an eye on what's happening and what's being discussed, what policies are coming up. You yourself might feel free to submit a proposal if you see an opportunity to improve policy, maybe simplification, maybe identifying a gap that exists. Anyone can submit a proposal. So if you're to Google ARIN policy submissions or proposals, you'll see the submission template. And share your feedback on the mailing list as far as any discussions going on for draft policies or recommended draft policies. We want your feedback. We need to know, is there community support? Do we need to change the language and the phrases? That's all very useful to us. Attend the ARIN public policy meetings. So Eddie mentioned later this week we have public policy meetings taking place Thursday and Friday. You can attend remotely if you haven't, if you're not going to be staying in the area here. It's free to register, so really great opportunity to have your say in what's happening in the policy space. And you're always free as well to find someone from ARIN or an advisory council member to share, apart from those fora, what your feedback might be around policy, what's important to you. And again, I would say that the technically sound bit is one of the things you could really help us on. And many of us are technical on the advisory council, but of course, it's maybe impossible at this point to have a perfect representation of every single technology out there that we have in use in our network. So if you know of some technology requirements or you see a policy that doesn't make that benchmark, let us know. That's really important. All right. Yeah, so last up I would just say, how do these policies affect me as a network operator, you as a network operator? It influences IP planning. So knowing what your roadmap will be for how you do IP addressing and what that interface to ARIN will look like, how you're going to engage ARIN to either seek a special allocation of IPs for IPv6 transition or to undertake a transfer of IP addresses. The policy manual is where those policies show up, and it's what governs how ARIN staff will interact with you when you try to execute one of those things. Yeah, be aware of those things. And then directory service would be one more, knowing what the reporting requirements are for registration of reassignments. So again, all of this is through policy. Have a look, pay attention to what's happening in policy, and you'll be better for it. All right, thanks, Eddie.
Thank you, Matthew. Up next, we'd like to give you guys some examples of current and previous policies that might be of interest to the NANOG communities. Just to give you an idea of what it's like. Up next, we have Chris Whitfield with 2024-5.
Hi, I'm Chris Woodfield, member of the ARIN AC since I think 2017. So I am the shepherd for the policy ARIN 2024-5. One thing I wanted to emphasize here is that while policy proposals can and many do come from the AC body, anybody can submit a policy proposal to ARIN. If you don't know the exact right words or exact right terminology, but you see an issue in the policy you would like to see corrected or updated, send in a proposal, and the AC will work with you to get it in the format that it needs to get out to the PPML and get the community feedback it's going to need. So back to 2024-5. This is a rewrite of NRPM section 4.4, which is micro allocations. First up, it is being renamed to critical internet infrastructure because in post-exhaustion world, a 24 isn't so micro anymore. The main, mostly it is minor, but definitely some significant changes to the current policy. The largest one that probably takes note is that there is some codification around the currently open question of whether or not IX allocations can be routed on the public internet. Many IXs don't want their exchange block to be routable, but a growing number of IXs do, primarily so that they can number resources such as route servers, registration ticket pages, or other resources out of that same block, which is a perfectly reasonable use of the space, but was not expressly sanctioned in the current policy. So the new policy has language to codify that. There are some better clarifications on not the technical requirements, but the documentation requirements when it comes to qualifying for a CII block, and a number of other language cleanups as well. We'll be presenting this, I think, tomorrow during ARIN's policy block, and we'll be looking for community feedback at that time. I am looking forward to hearing that and taking that forward to the next stage of our development process here. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And up next, we have Jerry George with 2025-3.
Hi, good day, everyone. 2025-3 is looking at the issue of out-of-region use and where there is a requirement for minimum criteria to allow this out-of-region use. Organizations can use ARIN registered resources, and there are valid justifications for using those resources outside of the region, provided that they meet certain criteria, that there is real and substantial connection within the ARIN region, and the applicant needs to prove that they're using the same type of resources within the ARIN region that they're opting to use outside of the region. And for V4, that's a /22, and for V6, that's a /44, and that they're using an ASN, one or more ASNs, on pairing sessions or on routes within the region. There are some concerns, and that's why this policy was proposed, that the minimum use of a /22 can be disadvantageous to smaller organizations who may not quite meet that criteria. So the concern is, how do we make the adjustment, and hence a policy to reduce that minimum requirement to a /24. Some of the concerns that have been raised is that there is potential for abuse by organizations who may either approach or obtain the resources from ARIN to use elsewhere to circumvent whether it is other criteria in other RIR regions or cost factors. And there is also concerns that because of the current minimum requirement, some organizations would approach other RIRs to get their resources. And that leads to two issues. One, there is a potential for loss of revenue for ARIN for transfer, registration, and renewal or annual fees. And there's also the operator convenience or inconvenience of having to deal with multiple RIRs to manage their resources. So overall, the policy seeks to make those changes and to ensure that there are not disadvantages to member organizations. Some of the comments that have been floated around is whether there is even a need for minimums, because if an organization and whether it is sufficient to simply prove substantial ties to the ARIN operation space, and whether it is still possible for the use of shell corporations to obtain IP resources from ARIN, especially since the IPv4 addresses have been exhausted, so there's no longer allocation from the free pool, it comes from the wait list. And so in that case, should out of use even be allowed for requests on the wait list? So those are some of the concerns that have been raised. Discussion should be encouraged on the PPML and at ARIN 56, which takes place as of tomorrow. As Matthew said, those who are staying on, and you're encouraged to stay on. And feel free to approach any of the AC members. We can have informal discussions, but bear in mind those discussions also get put on the PPML so that there is full transparency and everyone is fully aware of the scope, of the full scope of concerns that are raised, of points that are raised for the discussion purpose. So this is generally how it goes to ensure that whatever whether it is implemented or not, that it advances the interests of the ARIN members and ARIN community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And next up, we have Caitlin Pellick with an older policy, 2018-5.
Yeah, so this is an example of a policy that successfully made its way through the policy development process. This was 2018-5, disallow third-party organization record creation, a little bit of a mouthful. Really what this means is the intention was to remove the ability for third parties to create org records for another entity. This was intended to address the problem that could be caused by spurious org records, the least of which would be, noise and confusion in the who is as to who is the correct organization that you should be reaching out to if you have any problems. I'm not a network operator myself, but I can imagine, even as just a perfectionist who wants to see accuracy in the database, the types of confusion and noise that could be caused by having multiple organization records that all kind of point to the same place but don't necessarily represent the entity. And so the timeline on this, it moved relatively quickly, I would say, for a policy. So I believe that it was submitted in October of 2018. I did look back through the full timeline on the ARIN website. It was actually ratified as a policy and recommended to the board, I want to say, in early 2019. I suspect that there were probably some staff and legal implementation that caused it to only be deployed in 2020. But, as far as policy goes, this is, I would say, on the quicker side of the policy development process, but I think it is representative of generally how the timeline goes. And as we mentioned, there were a lot of motivations around this. We wanted to maintain registry accuracy and integrity. We wanted to make sure customers had autonomy and control around their resources, clearer accountability and verification, avoiding duplicate and conflicting records, my personal favorite, and then consistency in reassignments and reallocations. So as network operators, I would encourage you to take a moment and think about all of the different problems that could have arisen if there were third-party entities creating records in your name and what that could do to your business, to your networks, all of that. And so we also wanted to get into, I know there's been some questions around the differences between policies versus the ACSP. So the ACSP is the ARIN consultation and suggestion process. So in short, ACSPs are meant to address, anything outside of the NRPM, and that is anything that improves ARIN's day-to-day services, how the organization operates. It is suggestions that are reviewed by ARIN staff. Sometimes they might be put out for community consultation, but it's really more how ARIN's day-to-day business is run. And then obviously ARIN policies, they only impact the NRPM, the Number Resource Policy Manual. They go through the policy development process, and they directly affect how resources are managed across the ARIN region. And I did a little bit of a deep dive, and actually 2018-5 was, there was a question in the PPML as to whether this fell under policy or ACSP. I believe the reasoning given for why this was a policy matter was because it does directly impact the registration services, the directory services that ARIN provides. This is something that has a direct impact, obviously, to the community. So that was why it maintained its status as a policy instead of an ACSP. And then just to go over some more detailed examples, ARIN policies. So one example would be changing the maximum IPv4 waiting list block size or utilization requirements. That's an example of a policy. An example of the consultation and suggestion process, adding new features to ARIN Online. I believe I looked and I saw one currently has to do with improving the UI around ARIN's RPKI database. So kind of more on the ARIN on the ARIN Online process side of things, so not directly impacting the database. And last but not least, this, we really need to hear from the community. So that's why we're here. We want to make it very, very clear. If you rely on the internet, you rely on ARIN policies. It's kind of we're sort of the unsung hero, the stage crew, if you will, if you're a theater nerd like I am, who kind of keep things running in the background. We really, really do need to hear from you. And as you can see, there are both current and past policies that have really impacted how network operators do their day-to-day jobs. So we welcome your feedback. And I believe I'm handing this back to Eddie to close us out.
Thank you, Caitlin. So some key takeaways: policy-defined resource allocation practices. The policy development process is open, transparent, and community-driven. So your voice can directly influence any outcomes in the discussions of policy development. So your next step, if you're at all interested, is to get involved today, whether that's just keeping an eye on what policies are currently under discussion, just know what's going on, or actively participate on PPML, join the meeting remotely. We'd be happy to see you in person. Again, we'll be here through the rest of the week, all day today. Feel free to ask any of the many ARIN staff that are here and any of the many ARIN volunteers that are here today if you guys have any questions. And it looks like we might actually have time for some questions right now.
We do indeed have time for questions. Does anybody in the room or online have a question for this team? I have a suggestion from the online Q&A. Share to the audience that you may attend ARIN 56 virtually as well as in person. Both options are no cost. Even if you're going home today, you can still participate remotely. One question.
Hey, not a question really. John Sweeting with ARIN. I just want to tell the panel, great job on this. And the one reason that it had to be a policy for that, because it was in the NRPM that for detailed reassignments and reallocations that an organization could create records for their customers. So it had to go through the policy to get that out of policy.
Got it. Thank you.
And great job, guys, team.
All right. I don't see any more questions, so thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.